Hey folks, just a quick update for my Kate Toms project, and this is a slightly different format to my usual style, which typically involves a lot of post-production. This video is literally filmed in real time with me narrating, then it's run through my auto editor, so it's a little bit choppy in places, but it should give you the gist of the process I'm going through. So sit back and enjoy. Hey folks, so another update. I'm working on the Kate Toms project again. I should be building the templates for the archive houses and the single houses. However, I've realized as I've started getting into that I need to set up a core plugin. Now, previously this was set up, all the functionality was built in or baked into the theme. I don't think that's ideal, so I'm putting this in a plugin. So I also realized that I needed to set up some blocks as well as I was building the archive templates. So I've gone ahead and built a plugin. Well, I haven't built a plugin. I've used a framework to help me do that. And that is a framework called WP Plugin Boilerplate.me. And basically, this is a website that allows you to create a boilerplate plugin in an object-oriented way. If you're not familiar with OOP, basically it breaks down core functionality into smaller chunks and it allows you to manage things in a much better way. If there are developers out there, you know what OOP is. I'm not going to dig into that, but basically you can set this plugin up using the WordPress plugin boilerplate. Just fill in these details and it creates a zip file for you. So I've gone ahead and done that, and I can show you what I've done. My plugin is called Kate Toms Core. Okay, so the WP plugin boilerplate actually creates an includes folder, which sets up all of your files. It includes all of the classes and stuff that you need to load, and essentially breaks everything down into sort of two areas: the admin hooks and your public hooks. So, and they're separated into folders basically. I've also gone ahead and created a blocks folder. Now, initially the way I've set this up is to actually use the blocks folder to create a test block. Now, ultimately what I'll do is I'll bundle all of the blocks in the blocks folder, and then when I run npm start for my build process, it will just work. And I've actually got this up and running at the moment. So if we just check out my npm, my package.json file, we'll see here that we've got in the scripts folder, or in the scripts object, we've got the start parameter that would generally just be WP script start, but I've actually changed the source folder to be the blocks folder, and that basically what that will mean is it will just help me to build a suite of blocks, and then when I run npm start, it will actually build them into my build folder, and I simply just need to add the blocks one by one into the blocks folder. I think I'll probably do a separate video on that because it's a really useful way of bundling all of your blocks together as a suite if you want to include them in one single plugin, rather than creating individual plugins for individual blocks. So the way I've done that is basically my includes, if we go to the main class, which is instantiated as Kate Toms Core, and down here somewhere we've got, actually it's in the main core folder. This plugin basically loads all the files we need, including an activator, a deactivator, if you wanted to sort of build database structure up and then tear it down or add custom test data, you'd use your kind of activation and deactivation hooks when the plugin is activated and deactivated. I'm not going to go into that detail, but basically we load the main includes, which basically adds all of the classes that we need and all of the functions and methods. And then we basically run this function, and then it just basically instantiates the class. So it bundles everything together. It just works. It's a great little plugin. I suggest if you don't know anything about this plugin or this boilerplate, go and create it. And if you're familiar with OOP programming or object-oriented programming, this you'll be familiar with how it works. But yeah, go and check it out. It's really good. Again, I might do a separate video on that just to dive in deeper to it. But so what's going on is my main class is being loaded. Okay, so I've got my admin hooks and I've got my public hooks. And again, I will use this for all of the other functionality that just require server-side functionality. So on the admin hook, I've created an action on the init hook, and this is calling my register Kate Toms core blocks. So because it's in the admin hook, that loads from the admin folder. So if we look at the admin class, we've got various styles being loaded and scripts, and this is purely for the backend or when you're in the admin. And my function here is being called as a public function. And all this is doing is we're checking the build folder, because when we run npm start, which I've got the build process running, it's going to look into my blocks folder, and it's going to build out all of my blocks that are in the blocks folder, and it's going to put them in the build folder. So I'm setting up my directory path as the build folder, then I'm checking to see if it's a directory, and then I'm scanning all of the items in that directory, and then I'm running an array filter just basically to take out, I'm only interested in the folders. So I'm filtering out the root and basically the directory separators. So either go back to the root, or we actually use we come out of that folder. So then I'm using the folders array to actually register the block type. So it doesn't matter whatever the folder name is in my blocks folder, it will basically register the block type. If it can't find it, I'm just error logging a message. But basically, if I run this, I did have VSX debug running, so I can run that. So if I run this, I'll show you kind of what's happening. If I go to my front end and refresh the page. So basically what's happening is we're looping through, we're getting the directory, which is the build folder. Then we're scanning that directory for all of the items. And as you can see, we get the parent folder and the root folder, and that's represented with the dots. So it's picking up my folder for the test block. So then I'm filtering that out, and then my folder is basically just made up of the folders that I'm interested in. So then I can loop over those, and then we'll just run the register block type on the build test block folder. So that's going to basically look into this folder right here, and it's just going to pick up this block. So that's all that's doing. So if I just run that, and I can stop that running, and in my block as well, I've just set up in the edit, because this build process is running. Did I set it up in the edit? So I'm just console logging here saying that Kate Toms core blocks are loading. Because this is a test block, I just wanted to get the structure set up before I carried on building stuff. So if I go into if I create a new post, and then I should be able to put test, there you go, test block. So it is loading. And if we inspect the element, go to the console, there we go, Kate and Tom's core blocks are loading. So this is all working. So that's kind of where I'm at. Now I'm going to carry on with the templates, and I'll see you in the next section. Okay, so I've had to pull in some test data, and I'm just basically getting a small amount of data. So if I go to my tools, my migration tool, I've added a new button here that's basically to migrate test houses, and these are, I think ultimately I'll get rid of these, but I just want to get this set up. So what happens here is on my admin tool, I've got migration test houses, and I've got a function set up in here that basically gets cross DB migration test houses. So I'm making a connection to the database, and then I'm querying the post table with an ID of 11. I'm getting houses, and I'm limiting that to 12. So I'm getting the results, and with those results, I'm setting up some post data array, which is the data from the source database. And I'm setting up a new ID and inserting a new post. And then if that post ID was created successfully, I'm then adding the legacy ID from the source database. I'm doing that just in case I need to reference the new or the old house from the legacy data and update the new house. It's just a neat little way of getting that association with any legacy post IDs, because they are sequential and they will just be out of sync. And if you update one database, you'll never know which ID was used from the source data. So that's all I'm doing there, is with every house I'm updating the source, and then moving forward I can just update that single house if I need to extract data from there. I'm then also getting the metadata for the individual house, and I'm removing the metadata that I don't need for the widgets and availability and stuff that ultimately are going to come from an API. And then while I've got that data, I'm just updating the post meta for the new house with the new ID on the new database. So what that does is basically, if I pop back to the page, once I've run that, I've now got a set of houses that I can test with, albeit we may have missing taxonomies, but I'm not too concerned about that for the moment. Technically what I should have is a bunch of custom fields data, which I do, and I can now start using this to build the other archive templates and the single templates. I always forget how long these things take. In my mind, I'm going to jump onto doing something, but then I realize actually I need to jump back to something else to get data. So eventually I will get to setting up these templates. But now I've got this test data, I do have some in my site editor. I do have some data now that I can play with and start to mess around with these templates. So we look at the archive template. There we go. We've now got some data, and if we match that up with the existing site, we can start to see that it's not quite there yet, but we can see that we can start to style this data out. So yeah, I'll be back in the next session. So in the last session, I got to the point where I'd imported data just of a selection of houses, but you can see now that I've actually started building the archive page. We're pulling in the title of those houses pages, and we're also linking up some of the custom metadata, but we're using the block bindings API to do that. So you'll notice in here that we've got, I've hooked all of this up. So this block bindings API is linked to the custom metadata that I've imported, and that one is the description. And then we've also got sleeps, min, and max. And that was literally my test data that I wanted to do. And we've also got location there. So I've started to build out the archive page. Now there are some placeholders for this, but I haven't actually set up yet. So like the featured image, but the kind of basic structure's there. And I'm going to be jumping backwards and forwards building that. So if I show you, the beauty of using one thing I want to do say is the beauty of using the plugin Create Block theme is that you can do all of this in the UI, and then simply once you're happy with everything and you've done the spacing and layout for everything, you can just come to the Create Block theme tool and then save theme changes or save back to your theme. Once you save those changes, they basically go all back into your theme folder. Now, if we check out the theme folder, what I've done is we check out the archive for houses. By default, what that does is it will condense all of the code into the WordPress markup for themes and in a HTML format. Now, it compresses everything, so it's not very readable. But if you're doing everything in the UI and you're saving back to your theme, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, because once you've done it, you're not going to want to change it again. But what I have done is I've just changed the formatting and made the block binding a bit more readable. So this is one example of where the brief description is pulled in. So this was all done in the UI, in the editor, but you can see here it's pulling in the metadata. It's using the block bindings API, and the content is coming from the post meta source, and the key is brief description. And that is also being used for the sleeps minimum and sleeps max. So that's kind of all hooked up. So I've made a lot of progress. It's all coming together. I've also started working on the single page. I just pop that. My mouse is getting sticky. I've started building the single page as well. So if I pop back to if I just look at that archive page quickly again, you can just start to see how this is coming together. So like I said, I've got a placeholder for a lot of these things. Now, one of the placeholders here is going to be the search bar. And in my mind, I'm seeing this is going to be the interactivity API, and it's going to make changes on the results based on how the user interacts with this spacebar. This is on the original site, or this search bar rather. This is on the original site, so that's going to be a placeholder for that. But if we take a look at the front end of this, go to houses, you can see that it's kind of starting to come together. Although we don't see the placeholders in the archive page itself, but I will fix that. I'll come back. I'm going to jump backwards and forwards, like I said, on these things. So yeah. The other thing I've started working on is like the single houses. So if we look on the original site, this is kind of like the structure. You'll notice here that we've got a fading image. I've built that as a block. So you can see it now, that's got a Ken Burns style effect, and I've lifted that from a block that I previously built. Client might like that, may not. We can change that as and when. But you can see that I've started to build the structure now. The important thing, or the next step for me, is to get to all of these widgets. So this is like a standard widget, but a standard widget actually is made up. There are sub widgets of a standard widget, but I'm going to build them all out and then save them as patterns, and then I can go back and devise a script to look up that data. So we check out the single page, you'll see that we've got that's the template. Now I have to do some weird funky things here because of the way that the content works, but if I just go back and actually look at the page itself, I've structured it in this kind of way. So we leave the navigation out and we start to get into the content. So now the block is made up of it's just going to be a gallery, and I've only got one image there at the moment, but eventually that will be a block where we can add multiple images. So this is the beauty of setting up your plugin with multiple, or with a blocks folder. Now I've actually got this running, so I'm going to turn all that off so I can explain what I've got going on. So this is my core plugin, and like I said, I think in the previous session is that I've got this blocks set up, and now in the plugin folder I've got the package.json with all the node modules in there, and that means what I can do is I can cd into my blocks folder, and I can run a function which I ran earlier, which is npx WordPress at WordPress, which gets the WordPress scripts, create block, then you give it your block name, and then give it the flag no plugin, because I only want the core build files, because I'm actually going to build from outside of the blocks folder and within my plugins folder. So once I did that, that actually creates a new folder with all of the block files that I need, specifically for the build. So when I run npm start from within my plugins folder, which I need to open up in a separate window. So I'm in my core blocks, sorry, my core plugin folder. I can run npm start from within there, and that's going to look in my source path of blocks, and it's then going to look for changes within the blocks. So if I run that, that will start my build process, and I might get an error. No, I didn't. Okay, that's fine. And whenever I make changes in here, say I want to make that I don't know, type string, it's going to look at all of these folders and make those changes. So that's the beauty of setting up a blocks or multiple blocks within a single plugin. So I change that back to an array. So kind of like that's where I'm at the moment. So I've made pretty good progress, and I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to do another sprint, and I will report back in the next session. Hey folks, so in the previous session I imported some data for custom meta fields to test out the block bindings API, but you'll notice that on the archive page here we've got all the houses are kind of grouped in sections. Now we have a featured properties, we also have Kate Toms in the Cotswolds, and then we have down here by the sea here, and you'll see that these are kind of color coded. We have a yellow on one section, and then on by the sea or by the coast we have a blue. So I've adapted my script, my migration tool, to import the taxonomies which weren't being imported before. So I'm now including the taxonomies and for each of the houses. Now there is a bit of a weird one with the taxonomy that pertains to the type. So we have location, features, occasions, sizes, and we have one called type. Now, for some reason, if we use the taxonomy type, there is some sort of weird conflict, and I think it's with custom post type. So I've had to change the import to basically, if it was previously type, I'm now changing it to types, and then in my custom post type, I've actually changed the slug and the registered taxonomy to types, which is plural. So there's a bit of a weird anomaly there, but that was a bug I've fixed. I've run the import, and I'm now importing all of the houses, and we're getting all of the custom taxonomy data for all of the houses. So that's good that that's all coming in. And now then what I was going to do is to match the color coding from the previous site now these colors are way out, they're not correct at the moment. But actually, if I just take one step back, if I go to the template, what I've done is I've actually added the core query loops, and I'm using the filter for those to isolate each individual location. So if it's in the Cotswolds, then we pull it in this section. And I think I previously said that I'm only pulling in 12 houses at the moment. So there is some cross existence between houses that exist in one taxonomy and another. So it might be in the Cotswolds, in which case it will definitely be in the country. And similarly, well, actually you won't get any in the country or the Cotswolds. Well, you may get the country by the coast, but there is some crossover. And then we obviously have another section, which is the town. Now, the issue is that when we query the loop, I can get a class for each of these for the category or for the taxonomy it's in. But if we just go back up a step, it's actually listed in the list items. So the query loop shows a grid, and then it's broken down into a list of that's how the columns work. Now you notice in here that we have all of the taxonomy classes that are coming in by their location and by their feature. Now if I target the Cotswolds, which is just there, open this up a bit. The Cotswolds, that's not so bad, and the country's not so bad, but we do get some crossover because one of these houses, like for instance this one, it is in the Cotswolds, but it's also in the country. So I need to figure out a way of resolving that because of the cross contamination. So yeah, we have in the Cotswolds here, and we also have in the country. So the question is how do you then, in a hierarchical way, target just that element? Let's go back. I have actually set this up. I only set it up on the header because it's only the header background that I actually want to target. But if we look at the we look at the block, WP block post, and then in the country, and then the H2. In some cases, the Cotswolds appears in the country as well, so therefore it's overriding. Now, I can't really use important class because although it hits one, the first instance, we then have the issue with the country. So if I then made that important, that will then override the country, or in some cases it doesn't, or the Cotswold, sorry. So I have to figure out a way of targeting that. Now, what I'll probably do is to set the query loop with its own class, if I can do that, which we can under the advanced. So we can add an additional class there, and then we can use that class to target each section. So that's probably what I'll do. But that's where I'm at in this session. So it's looking pretty good. It's all coming together. So yeah, I'll crack on with the next sprint, and I will report in the next session. Hey folks, so in the last session I had an issue with targeting these kind of like color headers in per section. So you see that in Cotswolds we've got this kind of like mustard color, and then if we scroll right down we get a C, which is kind of like this bluish sea color. So I think what I said I was going to do was to actually target the query loop and actually set a class on the query loop itself. So you can see here that I've added a class of Cotswolds to my query loop. Now if we look in the front end, my template, which is here, we can see if we scroll up to, where am I looking? I need to go up to that div there, and then, no we don't, need to go to that one, there we go. So we can see here we've got this Cotswolds class that's now been added to each query loop. So I can then go ahead and target the individual ULI and then the H2. And in fact, I have gone ahead and done that, which is in this query.css. Now, if I showed you before in the previous video, you'll remember, now this is crossed out, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, you'll remember that if I have a class set up for in my theme that allows me to extend core blocks. So in my functions file, I just include my class on the init hook. And then basically if I put any CSS that refers to a core block or any JavaScript that refers to a core block, then I can then override or include that style to sort of override the core styling. And I've done that with the query loop block. So in the query.css, I can then target the Cotswold class and then color that background. Now, it struck me that, yes, I can do that, but that's kind of like it ring fences the styling. And actually what I realized is that I can actually do this in the template, and it kind of makes more sense to do that. So rather than actually give a class to the query loop that ring fences it and locks it down, I can actually go to the title and then color this background with the individual color. Now that actually gives the client more flexibility, you know, if they wanted to change this, because in fact what happens is if you change the post template, that will ripple through the whole of the template. So that actually will give the client more flexibility. That said, I have gone ahead and added all of the classes to these individual query loops. So if we scroll down to the next one, this one is the C. We can look at the advanced tab, and I've added a new class for that, and also I've done the same for in the country and in by the town. which is there. So I can come back to this and fall back. I think it's important to give your clients more flexibility. So by actually coloring up the title in the block editor, they can change this if they want to down the line or introduce new sections. But I do have the fallback to actually style these individually in the CSS, which ring fences it if they want to give their users less control, or the client wants to restrict that flexibility to change the colors per section. So next for me to do is to actually isolate these featured images. If we look in the database, in fact, I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to do another sprint on that section. So that wraps it up for this section. I'll see you in the next one. Hey folks, so in one of these sessions, I've obviously pulled in a lot more of these houses using my migration tool. But if we look at one of these, my last sprint was basically to get the featured images. So if we look in the database, and I've just got a random house here that I've plucked the metadata for. Actually, I'm going to look up my post status published, and I'm also going to add in the post type of houses, apply that filter, and then we get one of these houses. So I'm just going to pick up that ID there. So in one of these sessions that I think I've missed out is I've actually imported more metadata for the houses. Now you noticed in one of these we've got the house photos, and this is basically an array of gallery of images. Now, there's a couple of things that happen in the legacy code bases that basically we update in one place a gallery or set of images, and then the first image is actually used as the featured image, and then the next 5 are used in the single page. Now, I'll show you what I mean by that. But basically, we have some metadata there that we can use some IDs, and these are attachment IDs. So if I come back to the site and I'll show you on the original site here, you can see here that if we pick up one of these from the archive page of houses, if we pick up one of these pages, so this image here is the first image from this gallery, but this slide effect is actually only the first 5 from the gallery. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I won't show you all of those. We then have a gallery here, and this gallery has basically all of the images that are used for this particular house. And then this uses Jetpack for carousel. So I needed to devise something to actually get this data. Now, this is a carousel, or for want of a better word, a slider, whatever you want to call it. Now, it just so happens that I've created something in a previous video called a Ken Burns block, and it's about creating a custom block to create this Ken Burns style effect. And I'll leave a link in the video above this video if you're interested in watching that. But basically, this is a custom block that allows you to upload images to a gallery, and then you can pull that out to create this Ken Burns style effect in a slider. So the first thing I wanted to do, now this is one page, I've gone ahead and done this. Now what I did basically was I uploaded a set of images and used my plugin, which I've basically merged into my Core plugin, which is the Kate Toms Core plugin. And I've added into my blocks here the Kate Toms image fader, which is basically the same demo as the Ken Burns slider effect that I just showed you. Now all this does is basically allows you to upload a set of images and add them as multiple images to a gallery, and then we use in the front end to iterate over those to create this kind of add a class and then change the CSS to create that Ken Burns effect. So that's what's going on there. Now in the first instance, all I wanted to do was to actually add this to the gallery and then see what the markup was, because we're going to use AI, and I'll come on to that shortly, to help kind of code this up. Now if we looked at the code, now this is what happens when I use my plugin. This is the kind of code that gets dropped into the content. So we can see that we've got the fader slider there. We've got the comment object here, which is basically essentially it's a JSON object which is added as a comment, and then we get the HTML markup that uses the parameters from that comment to append into the markup. So essentially what I wanted to do was to find out what that JSON object was. So I first of all copied out that JSON object, and then I went to unserialized.com to just paste that in and then see what data came back. So we basically got an array of images and sizes, and then we get, and this is kind of for all of your kind of mobile source set, and we get some other information that we're actually using in the markup or in the comment, and then it's then used as parameters for the markup. So we can see that we've got all that data there. So I wanted to know basically from ChatGPT I gave it a prompt. I've got it somewhere. Where is it? Let me just go and find that. It's be in my account somewhere. Got to be here somewhere. Yeah, there we go. So I basically punched in this. Now there's a concept with AI where you either give one shot or two shot examples, where you basically ask a question and then give it an example. And then you can refine that information by iterating and making improvements. So basically I said, what WordPress function outputs this array? And then I pasted that array in as an example. And then using CodePilot, it's come back with, it's either the attachment metadata or image set, source set data, but most accurately it's probably the WP prepare attachment for JS. So I ran an example on this, or it gives you an example, or CodePilot kindly did. And I ran a test on that, and it did give me back the data that I needed, but it needed refining. So we iterated through a couple of other scenarios. So basically I wanted to get all of the houses with the post meta of house photos, and then join the metadata, and then we can then pull we can then iterate over those IDs from the source database to get the images. So I then copied out all of the data, or all of the markup that was created. So that's including the comment data and also the markup. So I basically just spat that into ChatGPT and said, look, given this format, how can I create a PHP array from the data that's provided with the function to prepare for JS, given the IDs or the image IDs found in the database from the query from the house photos metadata. So basically, and then append it into the post content. So basically, it gave me back a function. Now, this function wasn't great. Now, if you're going to use AI, you need to really understand what's going on with the data or with the code example. Now, we had to iterate. We had to iterate over this data with a chain of thought, because not all of it was correct. For instance, I needed to change the URL to, rather than reflect the test database, I needed to change the URL to reflect the production database so that the images will just pull in correctly. And then the block content would then be created, and then the wrapper markup for the markup the opening markup would be created. Then we iterate over the images for the slide effect, and then we close the markup. And then I wanted to update. So this is basically what ChatGPT gave back to me, which is a good starting point. And then to iterate that function, we just provide it with a post ID. So we took a chain of events, and I basically had to refine this because it didn't do exactly what I wanted. So, for instance, I wanted to remove the house photos metadata once the update had been created. And I could have done this myself, to be honest, but out of interest, I wondered, what we could do. So we have update results, and this returns true basically. And if it's true, we can then delete that house photos. I've actually opted not to do that because I need to use the house photos array again for the gallery and also for the featured images. So I didn't bother with that. But eventually we got to the point where somewhere down here, we got a fairly functional bit of code that worked, and I tested it, and it basically it does what I needed it to do. So this is called a chain of thought. So you basically reiterate, you go back to AI and you keep reiterating. So the first example, generally in my experience, is never the best. You have to kind of test it, look at it. You have to have the qualifications to look at the code and understand what's going on, and then iterate over those ideas to then come up with a solution. So I've doctored what it provided back, and I've actually created a new plugin. So rather than this be a migration tool, this is to do with block content. So I've got another plugin that I've created, and again, this will only be used in staging. This is the block edited content migration. So I'm going to sort of add helper functions into this, and I'm just going to add some action hooks to basically fire these callback functions. So this is my doctored version of this function, which basically we basically grab all of the data from the database for a house that has the house photos metadata. Then we iterate over those for each to then apply this function. And then I'm just logging some data. And as I said, I've removed the delete house photos metadata because I want to keep that for future update. So I can actually run through this. So I'm then using WP CLI and my step debugging with xdebug. So I've got some breakpoints here that will stop. So I can fire that function. We get all the post IDs, and then another thing we iterated over, I only wanted to get 5 because we could get like 10, 20 image IDs, I only actually want 5. So we used the array slice for that to reduce that down to 5. And that's the first 5 in the array. And then we then basically create the markup to string replace the data with the old or the test domain, and we replace it with the main domain, or the domain, for the production domain. And we're also changing the uploads folder, because with a multi-site, or there was an old way that changed the directories for each individual site ID. We're only doing this on the main site now, so that can just be changed to uploads. And it's been done a couple of times. So we then create a markup for the comment, and then the opening markup, and then iterate over the images, and then close that markup. And then we update the post with that content. And one of the things I needed to do was to just basically, if there was an existing content, I wanted to append the block content to the beginning of that existing content, because I need to use that existing content for other things if it existed. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I'm not going to run that anymore. And that basically got me to a stage where I've now got our single house page, and we have this Ken Burns effect. Now, this may not be the effect that the client wants, but it's there for now. We can refine that later. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. The next thing for me to do is to come back to I'm going to create the markup for the featured image, which is going to then be pulled into the archive page, which is going to be up here. So I'm going to do that in the next sprint. And for now, I'll just say see you in the next one. So in the last session, I managed to get the featured images in for the archive page. Now you'll notice that although we're on the test domain, which is my local one, if we inspect this element, we'll see that we're getting the link for the test domain, but the actual image is actually coming from the production, because there are a gazillion images on this site, and I don't really want to have to migrate and upload into my local machine. That's going to take up a lot of data disk space, because there's gigabytes of information. So in my test environment and my production environment, I'm using filters and hooks just basically to get the images from production. And also when we do the migration, this should just work seamlessly, because it will pull from the production site where the images already exist. So to achieve this, what I've done is use the house photo meta data. Just have a quick look at the database. I need to grab a house that is live that we'll have. So I need to get post status publish, and also the post type, which is house. Houses, is it house or houses? Houses. So if we look at Meadowbank, for instance, we look at the metadata that for when you add a featured image, it's actually added as metadata, and it's picked up from the attachment. It uses the attachment ID. So that gets added as the thumbnail ID. Now, as we already know, I got the first house, which is 96440, from the house photos meta, and that's simply added to the thumbnail ID. So I ran a script just to do that, so I'll just quickly run through. So to add the featured image, get rid of that, I created an action hook called add thumbnail featured image, and then just the callback, and the callback basically takes the post ID, and I don't even need to do that, do I? No, I don't need that post ID. Yeah, so if I fire this function here, this will get results from the database that have a published house with photo or house photo as meta key data, and then we iterate through that, and then I'm running another function on the house ID to basically get the house photo meta. If it doesn't exist, we just return. Then I'm using array slice, similar to we did in the previous function, to just get the first item in the array, and then we're just getting the first image ID, and then we're just updating that post ID, which is the house, with the meta ID. So I ran that script, and there's 400 odd houses that run through. Now, the other thing I did is to filter the thumbnail size, because obviously I'm going back to the production site to grab that image. So I'm changing the thumbnail size with a custom filter, and then I'm actually changing the HTML as well, based on, if we, again with this search and replace, if we find the test domain, we're actually going to use the live domain. So if I have a quick look at these functions, which is that one there, so that's setting up the thumbnail filter size to square, and square is actually in my theme file, or theme, plugins, themes, functions folder, file, sorry. I'm just adding in an image size of square, which is 280 by 280, and I should wrap that in an action hook actually, which I'll do at some point. And so that's the image size, and then there's also another filter which is it filters the HTML. Now you notice here that I've got this filter basically gives you the HTML markup for the thumbnail image, and then I'm resetting the size to my square size. So I'm then checking my environment. So if my environment's local, I'm then using a string in place, which again is another helper function that we've done before. That will take the string as HTML, and then it's going to take out the test URL and replace it with the live domain, and also going to take out this ugly looking multi-site directory structure, and it's going to replace it with uploads. So that's all that that's doing, and that is basically how I achieve pulling of all of these post thumbnail featured images. So we look at this first one here, that will technically be the first image of, we look at this one, this is quite a unique image. So that in Kiftsgate Court, that first image will be the first image that comes in through the slider, which is that one there, which has got lovely blue flowers everywhere. It's nice. Okay, so yeah, so that's what I've managed to do in the last session, and the next sprint is going to be to start actually iterating over these, the next sort of build of the pages. We look at the live site. The next part is to build out this white bar with these buttons, and then we start to get into all of these widgets. So that's going to be in my next sprint, and I'll report back in the next session. So hey guys, so in this session I managed to get all of the fader images in and the banner, or essentially the banner. I got the fader images in, or the carousel images for want of a better phrase. But I've also got these banners in, or this banner, which is what I'm calling a house title banner. So the way I did that was basically just to create it in the block editor here, and then went to the code editor, and you'll see here somewhere. This is actually placed as a pattern now, but I essentially created it in the block editor, then copied all this code out, and then pasted it into my theme as a pattern. So in my theme here, we have house title banner. So I've basically pasted that code in, and then when you create a pattern, it's sensible, or actually I think it's requirement to put all your patterns in the patterns folder and give it a sensible name, obviously. But when you create a pattern, you need to add a header as well with some required elements like a title, slug, and category. I'm not sure if you need category as a requirement, but that's included anyway. Just helps in the back end when you navigate to try and find these banners. So how did I get them all into all of the houses like so? Well, I didn't do it manually. Again, I used a script, which is here. So the same way that I added the carousel images, I'm effectively using the same script, and I've just appended the pattern to the end of it. Now I've copied the code out of that pattern. So here we're adding the images, and we get to this part, which is basically the block content. So that's my fader image there. And I've just appended the block content and pasted that same code in as the pattern. Now there's probably a better way of doing this, but I wanted to sort of trial this out to see how it would work, because my next challenge is actually creating all of the widgets. So anyway, I ran this script, and then it's basically added that to the database and updated the post content. So all of the houses now have a carousel and what I'm calling the house title banner. Now, next thing for me to do is, and I'm probably going to bring all of these sessions to a close. This is going to be the final video until I do my next big complicated part of this job, because the next part of this is actually, and I feel like I've been promising to come onto this bit since I started the job, but now I finally get to the part where I'm going to start adding these widgets, or building these widgets out. So this is essentially what's known as a standard widget, but this is also known as a standard widget as well. Sorry, there. And this is also a standard widget there. But what differentiates between each iteration is basically, if we have a look at this house, although we have several widgets, standard widgets, the first widget is iterated out as a text only. Now we notice that we've got image left, image right, gallery left, right, large image, etc. So the hook is going to be standard widget, text only. Now if we look at the next one, we'll see that this one is a large image, and then the next one is 4 images, and the next one is text only. So there's a repeating pattern. Now in the database, this is covered as metadata again. So what I will do essentially is in the block editor is start to create all of these different patterns and save them back to my theme. And then in the database, you'll notice that we've got, and I think I've been through this, but I've got a house here with an ID that has widget metadata. So all the widgets are outlined with what type of widget they are. So this is zero indexed. It's a zero indexed array essentially. So this will be, this first one will be 0. This one will be 1, 2, 3, etc. So I know that this widget here with the key of 0 is going to be referenced by that. And the hook is going to be the layout. So that's going to differentiate between the different types of widget and going to be defined by the pattern. So the pattern is going to be called something like standard widget text. So I will loop through, once I've created all the patterns, I can then loop through this data to find what the pattern is. And then using the block bindings API, it append all of this information. Well, essentially the layout will be the type of pattern. So the next one would be 2, I think, which is there. So again, we see the layout is text, and then if we look at number 3, okay, that's interesting. So I'm going to have to look up the key, I think. Anyway, that's the problem I've got to solve. So I'm effectively going to create all of these patterns and then loop through this data to then define which pattern gets pulled into the content. And that should match effectively for each page, all of the layouts. So I'm going to do this programmatically, essentially. So like I said, I'm going to bring this video to a close for this bunch of sessions and sprints, because this next one is going to be the most complicated one. So if you have been watching and following, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed and you feel that this is of interest to you, then please do subscribe, and also smash the like button, because that really helps get this content out. So until next time and the next bunch of sprints, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.